Welcome to Sterling Visionary Voices, the podcast dedicated to bringing you diverse, innovative leadership insights and actionable strategies for success. Join hosts Laura McNeil and Bob Medeiros as they explore the art and science of role model leadership through thought-provoking conversations with real professionals. Whether you're a seasoned leader or aspiring to excellence, Sterling Visionary Voices is your guide to navigating the complexities of your leadership journey.
Role is to integrate people, processes, practices, and priorities in order to optimize outcomes related to their organization's product. Leadership systems, especially those that emphasize a leader's personality, serve the purpose of efficiently empowering and aligning all members of a team culturally to promote consistently relevant and deliberate decision-making as business as usual. These organizations are fully engaged, productive, creative, and collaboratively aligned and inspired around their organization's mission. These organizations have clarity of focus on a purpose, what truly matters. With us today is Dione Geiger, president and founder of the Sterling Council for the past 30-plus years. Dione had worked with Florida Governor Lawton Chiles to form the Sterling Council back in 1991 to 92. And she has expanded the reach of this council beyond the state of Florida to the state of Georgia, as well as created an international presence. Dione has more than 40 years of experience in governmental roles and holds a master's degree in political science, public administration from the University of Florida. Welcome to Visionary Voices, Dione. I personally am very excited to have this conversation with you, and I'm wondering if we can start out with you providing your perspective in regard to the characteristics of and the importance of a leadership system within an organization.
Well, thank you, Laura. This is exciting to be here today. And one of the things I want to talk about is the Sterling management model. We have been, we've created this system and this approach in conjunction with the National Voltage Award some 33 years ago. It's been around for 37 years. It is a nationally recognized framework for performance excellence based on a leadership framework and a leadership model. That framework and model really starts at the top with leaders. One of the things that we've learned a long time ago and have observed from the many 33 years of doing this work is the important role that leaders must play in any organization if that organization is to be successful. It starts with building a culture. The hardest and the toughest thing for most leaders is to really establish that culture, but it's a very tangible thing as well. You can measure and you can monitor and look at your culture. The culture starts with respect and trust. It has a good communication vehicle, and it talks about making sure that people in the organization, including the leaders, have a commitment to the mission, and that is a well understood across the organization. But the culture of an organization is something you can feel when you go into organization. You look at their leadership and you talk to the employees and you talk to the other leaders across the organization. It's something that if you don't have a good culture, and it's the most important thing to get started with, you're not going to be successful because the employees and the customers understand and see the culture. It really is a living, breathing part of a high-performing organization. One of the things we always look at, and over the 33 years we've been doing this, is obviously when we do these assessments and we work with organizations and leaders, is that you really have to make sure that the leadership really starts at the top. They have a focus on their customer and they value their workforce. It really is a connected system where you have to look at everything, how it ties together, how it's integrated and aligned. It's not separate. Leadership cannot work autonomously. They have to work in conjunction with the entire organization, across the organization, and across all the leaders. It is very critical that you look at processes by which you manage and lead. And with our system, it starts with, the leadership category. It goes into a focus on planning because, again, when you're looking at leaders, you have to have a plan and you have to have direction and you have to be both tactical and strategic when it comes to your focus of where you're trying to take the organization and how you're going to accomplish that mission. How do you measure that and how do you know and what are you focusing on? Then one of the things we always talk about is the focus on customer. If you're not there to serve the customer as a leader and as an organization, who are you there to serve? And then we look at all the data and information and how you manage with data and information. In fact, one of the analogies I love to talk about is sports. Well, and I love college basketball. And I was listening to a game and a broadcast the other night, and the commentator was talking about the importance of data analytics and using data to drive decision-making in terms of how you coach and lead a basketball team. It's amazing how the data and information and analytics is really seen across many organizations and many spaces, and not just in the corporate world. It's really in any organization that's high performing. Your use of data and information is absolutely critical. Then we look at the workforce. Again, the customers and the workforce are totally connected and aligned. Without really having that commitment to your workforce and engaging your workforce, making sure they've bought into the culture and the mission of the organization, you're not going to get very far. The workforce is one of the keys to your success. And then the final thing we look at outside of results is processes and all the operational components of what an organization is. You have to really understand all your key business processes, all your support processes, how they complement and integrate and work together. And the bottom line is, how does it all tie to results? How do you drive outcomes? How do you sustain outcomes? And so this leadership framework and this leadership system that is Sterling is really a holistic view of how a leader, if you're going to intentionally drive organizational performance excellence, you have to do it through a system or a framework that's really very intentional, very hardwired, and very much integrated across the organization.
Yeah, so the Sterling model, just for our listeners so that they understand the framework that you just described, is comprised of 6 process categories and 1 results category, obviously the outcomes that you were referring to. But it's the 6 process categories that have a direct alignment to influencing that results category. And those 6 categories are leadership, strategy, customers, data and knowledge management, workforce, process. Those are the 6 process categories that drive to our results. When you have all of those 6 process categories aligned and they're working together against the same vision, mission, values, you have a culture that is focused on driving those results. One of the things I would also like for you to focus us on, do you have any role model examples of how certain leaders that you've worked with have harnessed that power of that leadership framework that you have created in the Sterling model?
I think one of the things that's important with the leaders that have been really what I consider to be role models, they not only look at the leadership system and all of the 6 categories and, they're focused on driving the outcomes, because the bottom line is you do all of this because you're trying to not only drive and sustain good business outcomes for your organization. It's all about not only becoming, but sustaining high performance. But one of the things we always talk about is how important that is and how they measure that. One of the things that the criteria also looks at, and when someone really becomes, I think, a role model, they really begin to understand, what does maturity look like? How do you measure maturity, and how do you measure how well you're doing? And we do that through something we call ADLI, which is really the maturity model is approach, deployment, learning, and integration. And a good leader and the role models that I've been able to, I've seen over the years, they really talk about approaches, constantly focusing on, okay, what are we doing? How do we continue to do it well and across the organization? How do we continue to evaluate and improve how we're doing it? And how do we make sure that it's all fully integrated where everyone can see why we're doing it and what the purpose is of doing this? We're not just working for work's sake, but we're really driving strategy and process across the organization so that we really become high performing and we sustain high performance. And when I was talking to one of our leaders the other day, they talked about how they use that ADLI model to really help continue to really drive their leadership group. And they're constantly using the concepts of, okay, how mature are we? How can we continue to improve? When's the last time we've evaluated and improved how well we're doing something? It's not just about doing something well, but continuously improving and continuously driving improvement, and at times innovation across an organization. Innovation where you really know that you need to step it up and you need to really do something different because you're not getting the results you need. And when you look at that, and I think the other thing I've seen with really role model organizations is when you see the employees who really believe that the leaders really, their mission and their passion for excellence is really hardwired into that leadership. There's the communications, the discussions, the behaviors. I mean, everyone looks at leaders and they look to the leaders to say, how are they believe? How do they behave? How do they continue to role model those behaviors and those beliefs? In a high-performing organization, the leaders that I've seen that have been high-performing, and I've seen them in healthcare, I've seen them in government, I've seen them in the service industry as well, it really starts with them believing and communicating that across the workforce. And their fellow leaders, they really got their fellow leaders to buy into that as well. I mean, it's really a full approach. You can't just be the leader at the top. It has to be the leadership system and all the other folks that support the organization. They have to buy into it. Now, granted, you're never going to get 100% buy-in from any leader and every leader in an organization. But what you do is you get enough of them where the other ones go along because they know that not going along is they're going to stand out. They're not going to look good when they're not supporting what the organization and the mission of the organization is trying to accomplish. So a lot of times by default, they come in line because enough of the leaders have come together and agree with what's important. And I know one of the leaders that I've talked to many years ago talked about one of the first things they did when they came into the organization is they really understood which leaders are really on board with what we're trying to accomplish with our mission. And you give people choices. You give them choices of, do I stay on board or do I get out of the organization because you're not going to be part of it? It's like that employee engagement thing. If they're disengaged as a leader, it's harmful to the organization. So effective leaders that have been role models, they really build that leadership cadre and they make tough decisions. And some people exit the leadership team when they can't buy into what that leader or that organization is trying to accomplish. And I've seen that in many organizations where it took them a while to build that team. Again, I can think of certain leaders that have done that very well, but they did it intentionally and they did it with heart because, again, it's about the organization that they're working on, not about individuals. It's the organization that's important, not individuals that don't want to get on board and don't want to be part of an accountable system of leadership. So you see that more and more with high-performing organizations where they really hold their fellow leaders to account for what's important and they measure and account for it. One of the organizations, and we know this organization, one of our big health departments, I mean, they do that monthly through review of metrics and they hold the leaders accountable to the outcomes. And then when the outcomes aren't going in the right direction, what do we do? It's not coming into a meeting and saying we're having some problems. It's leaders that are already saying how we're fixing issues. They're coming into the meeting with a fix or a recommendation to address something, not we have a problem. So I think that it's that accountability, the measurements that you have to have. A lot of those measurements come from your customer surveys. They come from your processes and the timeliness of service. They come from the employee feedback that you get from the workforce surveys. They hold their fellow leaders accountable through metrics and through measures and through outcomes. And high performance role model leaders hold themselves accountable themselves. At the very top of the organization, they're tying themselves to outcomes and metrics as well.
I love that. And it's so very true because you and I have been to visit many leaders who have embarked on the journey of building out this model within their own organizations. And I have to agree with you. If the leadership team is not working collaboratively together and focused on the same mission, building the same culture, same type of culture, with the same values, focused on building a defined set of core competencies, then you have disconnection at the top of the house. And if you have disconnected leaders, then you're going to have a disconnected organization. It only multiplies as you go through the organization down through the levels. But when you have that cohesiveness at the leadership level, it seems like the teams that we've seen are performing well beyond their ordinary expected means because they're inspired, they're empowered. So the tone is really set at the top with this model.
It has to be set at the top, Laura. Everything in any organization starts at the very top of the organization. And you see that again across all sectors, all types of organizations. And I can tell you that the rest of the organization sees that. They feel that. I mean, when we go into high-performing organizations, that leader, even the top leader, is out there walking the talk. They're doing, they're constantly out there walking the halls. They're meeting with people. They know who their workforce is. They're doing anything from town halls to regular meetings. They spend time on other shifts. They don't just stay, in the day shift. If it's like a hospital, they're there. They spend time consciously and deliberately on a regular basis in, visiting the employees and visiting the organization in the after hours, doing the off shifts because, they need to understand that leadership is not just there for the 8 to 5. Leadership is there 24 hours a day. We're committed to everyone and every space across the organization. You see them not just in the process and the key operational departments, but you see them in the support areas as well. Because, it takes all those support areas to really support the main operations of the organization. So leaders have to be visible. They have to be seen. They have to be transparent. There has to be good communication. It has to be two-way. There has to be that belief that the leader really cares and counts on everyone to be a part of a system. And I've seen organizations where they truly believe that leader's in it for them, that they have their back, that they know that what's important to them is important to the leader. The organizations that are role model organizations is pervasive. It's top down, it's bottom up. And they really do believe that not only are they committed to the mission of the organization, but they believe that leadership cares across the organization.
They're committed to each employee, each workforce member. They're committed. They recognize who they are and they're valued. It's really interesting because Anthony Napolitano and I had a very interesting conversation the other day on servant leadership. And I really believe that the underpinnings of the Sterling model is based on a foundation of that servant leadership, where the leader has to serve the workforce to understand what the organization needs in order to propel it forward.
Yeah, servant leadership is such a big part of good effective leadership. There are different styles of leadership, and you see a lot of servant leadership in healthcare organizations specifically, and you see it in terms of, we've even seen it in local law enforcement, where the leader was really committed to a servant leadership style, where they're there to serve employees. They're there to serve the organization. They're there they're leading the organization at the top because they are the leader, but they're there to serve across the organization. And their job is to facilitate, to make sure there's good communication, make sure they're hearing from not only the customers, but from the workforce about how they can make things better. And the servant leadership approach to leadership, it's one of the ones we see specifically a lot in healthcare, but it's also in other organizations as well. And it's just because it's such an important part of a good leadership to really have that servant perspective. You're there to serve versus you're there to lead. I mean, when you lead through service, and I think that's really the key with servant leadership.
So over the past 30 plus years, you've worked with a number of organizations as they've embarked on their role model leadership journey. Are there any organizations that have stood out more than others?
Well, we've had 98 role model organizations in 33 years, Laura, and I think there's some organizations, I think, that when you look at them, you see that they're in it for the long haul. They're in it for the commitment to excellence, and they're not in it for the award. When they're in it for that long haul, and we've had role model organizations that have been recognized multiple times. The most recognized is 5 times as a role model organization in Florida. It's because they're committed to that excellence and that performance excellence journey. And I think of Lillian Rivera from Miami-Dade Health and her commitment to excellence and being the best she could be in Miami-Dade. And she propelled her organization to be a 5-time role model organization. Don Alacock up in St. John's, they were a 4-time role model. And, they were just in it for the continuous opportunity to showcase and to really recognize and engage their workforce and to make sure they were doing everything they could to serve the citizens and serve their communities well. I see that in Wellstar up in Georgia, where they're committed to really that framework and that model of excellence because they want to be the best hospital system providing world-class service and healthcare every time to every patient every time. And so you see that with those leaders where they really truly understand that this is not about a flash in the pan. This is really about a commitment to excellence that is long-term, that is intentional, that really does, even in healthcare, comport with a lot of their Joint Commission requirements and standards, but it also takes it a notch above where you really are talking about the commitment to leadership excellence across the organization and commitment to the workforce and commitment to the patients when it comes to Wellstar and making sure that they have a consistent, good experience every time they're being served because, quite frankly, hospitals is not where we want to be, but when we're there, we want to make sure that we're getting the best possible healthcare service, whether it's cleaning the room or the food we get in a timely fashion or the check-in, check-out process. Just all those things are critical to the overall care. And so organizations like Wellstar up in Georgia, some of the multiple award recipient organizations, I think we see that a lot in Florida with tax collectors who have embraced this model and see how it really applies to that customer service with a smile. You're collecting taxes, but let's do it well. Let's do it timely. Let's make sure we're doing it accurately. And let's making sure that the citizens, when they come in to pay their taxes or get their license, feel like we're doing it with a mission and a passion to doing it the best and serving them with a smile on our face. When you have good service, you feel that smile. I do know that we see that across many organizations. It's not just those that have longevity, but it's those that really understand that it's not just an award they're going after. It's really a framework for excellence that they can sustain and drive. And then they can hold their leaderships accountable. Their leadership across, when we are looking at WellStar, they have 11 hospitals, and, they have to have a system to hold all those 11 presidents accountable to being the best they could be and fulfilling the mission and the vision of that organization. And you do that through a system of leadership, holding ourselves accountable and making sure that we're all being held accountable to the same standards of excellence.
Right. And it's a framework. And I know you've given examples from the healthcare industry, but this framework is applicable to governmental agencies. It's applicable to manufacturing. It's applicable to banking. We've had banks and credit unions come through. We've had a myriad of different Department of Education, Department of Transportation. We've had a myriad. I think Boeing even played a part, right? So this framework is applicable to it's fungible to any industry, any organization. And it's also the people that we've been working with, or maybe this is a question for you, but this is driven from the C-suite down. It's the pinnacle, the top of these organizations that buy into this model, and they leverage it as a system of alignment throughout their very complex organizations. Any thoughts on that you'd like to embellish on?
Well, clearly, from the very beginning, the Sterling Council adopted this model across all sectors. We, unlike the National Award, where they started off just with manufacturing and service, in the very first year when we embarked on this process, we truly believe that this model of performance excellence applies across every sector. Obviously the not-for-profit government sector, the education sector. We really have spent a lot of time focusing on the other sectors, and healthcare obviously is one that's also been a sector that's really been a big factor in not only Florida but across the country, because healthcare has embraced this model and has probably been one of the biggest players across the country of understanding the importance of really maintaining standards of performance and holding themselves accountable to not only national benchmarks with clinical outcomes, but also, the customer and the employee satisfaction metrics and engagement metrics are critical to a hospital and to a healthcare system being successful, because it's all very transparent. And so how do you really drive that performance? You have to basically, be able to demonstrate indicators and measures of outcomes. I mean, if I'm going to go in fact, I was just talking to my granddaughter the other day when she was going to a doctor who was a specialist. I said, what do you know about this person? What kind of expertise? What kind of ratings do they have? Where are they in terms of their standards? And, where are they in terms of, how long they've been in the business, and how are they really, what excellence they have in terms of their outcomes. You can see all of that. A lot of that information is out there, very transparent on different websites. And so I think that one of the things we're always looking at, Laura, is making sure that the results really are where the evidence of performance really exists. The bottom line is the results, the outcomes, and how well you perform across not only your sector, but in some cases nationally in terms of, outcomes. It's not just about making sure that, you perform well within your own sector, but how do you compare to other sectors? We always tell our organizations in Florida and Georgia, when it comes to the customer and the employee, look for the best. Ritz-Carlton is an example. One of the organizations we worked with many years ago is always about ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen, and they always set the standard in the bar very, very high. It's about excellence every time they serve a customer. They knew they had systems that were able to articulate what was important to that customer when they walked in the door, and their repeat customers, they knew everything about them in terms of their likes and dislikes, so they could make sure that they served them well every single time. There was not variation in the service level that the customer expected. There was consistency in the level of service. So I think we see that across all sectors, that there's no reason that a government organization like tax collectors, as an example, can't have consistent levels of service and can't really drive performance to a next level. We see that we're getting ready to work with a medical school, a medical college, Laura. I'm excited about that. Who's basically developing the doctors for the future, and they want to be high performing. And we're getting ready to work with a medical school and basically help them identify what it takes to be high performing, so they can make sure that the students that are coming through their school are the best they can be when they graduate and they get out into the community serving as doctors in communities across the country. So it applies to every sector. It's about, as a leader, though, you have to hold yourself accountable. You have to realize that you have to set and establish a very strong culture of what's important. And you have to connect that culture with how you as a leader behave, treat people every day, work every day. Everyone in the organization sees the leaders and how they perform, how they hold themselves accountable, and how they treat and show respect across the organization. I think that's always key with an organization. Is it can happen at any type of organization. We've always believed that what applies in the private sector applies to the government sector and to the not-for-profit sector, that it's all about being the best you can be across any sector. And there's ways to measure and hold yourself accountable through a system of leadership that's very intentional, very hardwired, and has a rubric that you can measure how well you're doing.
I love that. Really, really great points. So in closing, do you have any other words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our listeners that we might not have already covered?
Well, Laura, some of the stories that you and I have shared over the years and some of the things that I think have really resonated with me. We've been out there in many types of organizations, including education. And the ones that probably had the most impact on me was a group of janitors at a school. And I also had the same experience with the service workers in the cafeteria. But it started with the janitors at a school where we talked to them about what was important to them every day in terms of coming to school. They're obviously, they're not in the classroom. They're not teaching the students. We said, why is it important that you believe in what's important to this organization and that you're doing a good job? And they said, what's important is we keep the school clean. We keep the classrooms clean so the students have a great learning environment so they can learn, they can be successful. The same thing with the cafeteria and the food service staff. They thought it was so important that every student deserved the right to have a good meal and be fed every day. And they saw their commitment to making sure every student had what they needed nutritionally. They were open early to make sure that the students that came to school and had the free breakfast were able to get fed before they started their classroom experience so that they were learning on a full stomach. And they talked about how they really were committed to the mission of the organization because they understood that the mission was to make sure students were successful and they had every opportunity to learn. So I was so impressed. We talked to the janitorial staff, custodial staff, and the food service workers. I mean, they probably had more of an impact on me in all the years because they were so sincere about what they were doing and why it was important.
That's a great example because I was with you on that one. And you're absolutely right. The mission statement was every student can learn, every child can learn. And I love what you're bringing up because the janitors took it upon themselves to your point, to ensure that it was a clean school, because if it's a clean school, the students will feel proud about their school and it will help them learn. Similarly, like you brought up with the cafeteria workers were predominantly females, not that, but they're mothers. And they said, a child can't learn if their belly is hungry. We have to fill the bellies. So while we were there, and you might remember when the cafeteria workers were walking around and seeing, does Johnny have lunch? Does Sally have lunch? And if they didn't have a lunch to eat, they would bring them back into the cafeteria and ask them, what do you want to eat? And then they would cook it up right there and give it to them so that they didn't turn them back to their classroom unless they ate the lunch. So heartwarming.
Well, it was so important because they were connected to the mission of the organization and they were connected to every student deserving and having the right to learn. And they saw the work that they did connecting to that. They weren't in the classroom teaching the instruction and helping the students directly learn, but they were providing them a classroom experience where the classroom was clean, the school was clean, and like you said, a clean environment and a classroom that really is conducive to learning, that's organized and clean. It's going to be much better learning environment for the students and for the teachers. And the janitors and the custodial staff, how important that was to them, that they took pride in making sure that school was clean because it was important to them. Those students had a good school to come to, that they took pride in the school, the students themselves took pride in the school because the school looked good. It was nice. It was well kept and taken care of. And just like they were taking care of the school, they felt like they were taking care of the students because the students could learn the school was clean and they had food in their bellies, as you said. And I think that probably impacted me more. I mean, I've seen other stories in healthcare and the passion that they have for the patients and the making sure that they're there for the families. And I've seen really heartwarming stories around that as well. But I think the ones in education have probably had the most impact on me over the years because you really saw the folks at all levels of the organization really understanding the importance of the mission. And that was probably as clear as an organization I've seen.
Absolutely. And the alignment that was there, like you're calling out, the alignment, everyone had the same mission. Every child can learn, but they interpreted it to reflect their role in the organization. Cafeteria workers, the children must eat. Janitors, the children must feel pride in their school, and that would help them learn. That alignment leads to the outcomes. And one of the outcomes from that particular facility was that 77% of the students at the beginning of the year were non-English speaking. But by March, by the end of the school year, when the Florida Comprehensive Aptitude Testing, the FCATs, known here in Florida, came out, that school was achieving an A rating, A plus in some instances. That's the outcome. That's what you started talking about at the beginning, how the 6 categories, if they're well aligned, they will drive, intentionally and deliberately drive very impressive results for the organization. And that particular example is a phenomenal example of how the model works and the stretch goals and the stretch accomplishments that it can achieve.
But Laura, that all started at the top. When we talked to the principal and we talked to the lead custodian and we talked to the lead cafeteria workers, they all were connected and they all could communicate to the workforce the importance of that. And they communicated it with passion and they communicated it with the belief that they could make a difference with every student every time. And, it's like serving every patient every time. Same thing. When leaders can connect with the workforce across the organization, whether it's keeping a hospital room clean so that you're basically making sure that the patient is safe and you're basically lessening the spread of disease and, anything that could happen and because, of the room not being, kept clean and the standards by which they need to clean it. People, they I've seen hospitals where they understood that as well, how the cleanliness was so important and washing your hands every time to make sure that you're not basically spreading any infection or disease, was really, really, really important. And but that starts at the top and that starts with holding everyone accountable. And sometimes it's through inspection and sometimes it's through things that don't go well. And then making sure that we understand why it's important that it go well, that if the room wasn't clean, how do we make sure that next time the room is, cleaned properly? So it's through that accountability and holding ourselves accountable, but it starts at the top and then it also permeates across the entire leadership system because remember, the leader at the top can only do so much. The leadership system across the organization also has to buy in and believe that this is important to the mission of the organization.
I also remember another example of this in a hospital setting where we went into the food prep area for the hospital's cafeteria. We're talking to the head of the dishwashing team who's been there in that role, the supervisor, for 27 years. And I asked the supervisor why she chose to be there that long. This must be a unique place to work. She said, "Are you kidding me? I've stayed here for career advancement." You're in the same organization, but when she described it to us, and you might remember this, she said, "Oh no, the CEO knows who I am. I can walk around and pick up dishes from patients and have friendly chats with the patients. He gives me free rein to go out into the organization and help the patients and help the other team members." And she viewed that as career advancement. But the most interesting comment she made was that the CEO reminds her that she plays a very critical role in making sure that no plates or utensils leave the kitchen with germs on them, because that will make the patients ill and prolong their healing. That's a great example of intentional leadership alignment.
Mm-hmm. I know. And it's incredible when when the culture really exists and leadership really is pervasive across an organization. You see that so clear, Laura, and it's really where they connect to the mission and the purpose. And it's ingrained. It's not something they have to think about. It's ingrained in the work they do every single day. And we have seen that across organizations that are high performing. And again, we talk about leadership. It starts at the top, but the leadership also is across the organization, and how do leaders across the entire organization also hold themselves and each other accountable to what's important every single day, in every single transaction, in every single service, and every single opportunity they have to really make a difference, they do it. And that's really when you see high performance and where they go out of their way to make a difference.
And kudos to the leaders that are out there inspiring their workforce members, because you're going to get so much more from those inspired team members than you will a demotivated, flattened team member.
The passion for excellence exists in every one of us, Laura, and the passion to be the best we can be. It's how do leaders motivate and inspire everyone in the organization to feel important, to feel a part of that mission, and to feel part of that passion. And that's really where I think you see a difference with high performing organizations. It's you can feel it. You can feel the culture. You can feel that passion. You can feel that commitment to excellence. And we have seen that in many organizations over the last 33 years. And, the 98 role models, I would say, suggest there's something in each one of them that made a difference in terms of leadership. But again, you don't see a role model. And the one thing I will go back to, you don't see a role model that doesn't have a very, very strong leadership system. In category 1, leadership is where you see that they have that commitment to excellence. There's good communication. There's good transparency. There's a focus on action, and it's really tied to how they measure success. And that's really what leadership's all about, is they have to hold themselves accountable as well. And it starts at the top.
Absolutely. Well, it's been really fun chatting with you, Dione, and going down a little bit of memory lane. Great examples to share, and I'm sure our listeners have appreciated them as well. But thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And we'll have to have you back.
Thank you, Laura. Enjoy it. And I've enjoyed knowing you for 33 years. And we're aging ourselves. But, we've been here in the trenches, and we've seen so much over these years. And you can see what really makes a difference. You really can.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Dione.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Sterling Visionary Voices, Insights for Role Model Leadership from the Sterling Council. Discover more and connect with us at sterlingvisionaryvoices.com.